In May 2021, Queensland-based Yowie researcher Dean Harrison and his team are testing out infrared cameras at Springbrook National Park. They picked this spot because they believe they've seen traces of Yowie activity among the brush. And that night, they captured this mysterious footage. The thermal imagery seems to show a solitary figure hiding behind or even hugging a large tree trunk.
Now, this is doing what Yowies do. They hug a tree, pretend they're a part of a tree if there's a human in the area, and they just blend. So you can see him just putting his head in.
Minutes later, the image changes. Now it looks like there's a couple.
Two giant creatures emerge from the foliage, and one is bending down to pick up something.
As it bends over, you can also make out what looks like one of the creature's heads. It looks cone-shaped. The figures are large with wide shoulders and ape-like proportions. Field researcher Cliff Barrickman, who has been to Australia to study the Yowie, says the footage aligns with descriptions from indigenous peoples going back centuries.
All of the Aborigines down there have drawings on the walls of caves depicting these things. They're prevalent in their storytelling traditions as well. But then the settlers came in the late 1700s, and they too started running into Yowies, which is another very strong indicator that they're a real biological animal.
Now, Bigfoot-like creatures are part of folklore the world over. Nepal has the Yeti, Mongolia has the Alma. And one theory is that they all descended from a single Asian ancestor, some of whom made it to Australia, while others crossed the Bering Land Bridge, came to North America, and evolved into Bigfoot. If this video is real, it could help prove that theory, but that's a big if.
There's some sort of subject, creature, person, if you will. It's something that's emitting a heat signature. And as we go through different FLIR filter arrays, this object's movement is consistent. There is something happening in here that's moving around.
Look at the footage with this filter. Now the head comes into better view. It appears to have a pronounced sagittal crest, a ridge of bone along the top of the cranium. It's similar to what's seen in the skulls of the early hominid Australopithecus, which some believe to be the common ancestor of Bigfoot, Yowie, and other similar creatures. But Primo is cautious.
Although we have not found any evidence to support that the recording was fabricated, we have no idea what is being depicted here.
Next, our zoologist Roxy Furman analyzes the anatomy of the figures.
What we can see clearly at one point is that there are two animals pictured. It also looks like it's a bipedal animal, which means it walks on two legs.
That might have you thinking primate, but here's a key fact. There are no known primates native to Australia. In fact, the only bipedal animals are the cassowary and the kangaroo, which look nothing like this. So how do we explain the heat signatures in those head shapes? Furman thinks she may have the answer. People wearing headlamps.
That would explain why the head's a slightly strange shape.
That would mean the people were either misidentified or they're participants in an elaborate hoax, maybe Australia's version of the Patterson-Gimlin film, if that was a hoax too. But anthropologist Kathy Strain says that in this case, size does matter. The research team went back to the spot in daylight and measured the tree, matching the thermal footage as best they could to get a sense of the size of the figures in the infrared video.
Whatever it is more than 8 feet tall. The possibility of them being human is highly unlikely. I came to the conclusion that what this video shows are two real Yowie. I think it is one of the most significant films taken in at least 50 years.
So yes, there's a possibility that this is a hoax. But based on Professor Strain's estimate of the creature's height, we're going to say these are possible Yowies. It's 2011 in a small village in Russia. A local farmer reports that his home is shaken by a large explosion nearby. While looking for the source, the farmer stumbles upon this. Some remains that look nothing like the usual local wildlife. Take a good look. The creature has a strange head and an even stranger torso and limbs. And the state it's in is even more puzzling. It appears petrified. The way this finding is displayed in the video is also quite intriguing.
What's very interesting to me is that they're drying some corn at the same time. And I wouldn't think you'd want to put something alien next to a food resource.
According to the source who gave us this video, the cause of the explosion was never found. But residents of the town were more frightened by what this creature could portend for their village. Journalist Aaron McCarthy says local legends could explain why.
In Slavic folklore, there's Baba Yaga, a witch who lives in the woods in a shack that has chicken legs and chicken feet. She also steals and eats children.
Baba Yaga has become the equivalent to the boogeyman for kids in this region. Some locals may have believed this creature was her handiwork, but McCarthy says there could be another slightly less creepy explanation.
Permafrost is melting in Russia, and with that melting, all kinds of extinct creatures are popping up, like mammoths and rhinos. So potentially, this creature is something that's extinct that we just don't know about yet.
Now, there are some conditions on Earth that could instantly mummify a living creature, like the super alkaline waters of Lake Natron in Tanzania. But there's no evidence something like that currently exists in Russia. So before we determine if this video shows an undiscovered dinosaur or even a child-eating witch, our experts will dig deeper. First, video forensic analyst Mick West examines whether this specimen could be some kind of hoax.
I think the only way you could have done that is to have modeled it from life, and that means that you actually had the real thing to start off with. So I think the simplest explanation here is that what we're seeing is what we're getting. This is in fact a dead animal that has been partially or fully mummified.
If this is indeed some kind of animal, what kind of animal?
Just in terms of the morphology, something about its face looks quite bird-like to me. It looks like it could have part of the beak that had formed off or not been preserved in this mummification process, but it's got a really big eye socket. Birds tend to have quite small eyes, so for me that would kind of rule out a bird.
That X's out it being one of Baba Yaga's chickens. Biologist Floyd Hayes is thinking mammal.
Okay, right here, it looks like there may be some teeth in the jaws. To me, the skull looks much more like a mammal. It does look like there may be a wing. It could potentially be a fruit bat. There are some large species of fruit bats called flying foxes.
Furman sees some merit in the bat theory.
They also do have that similar large nose that we can see in this fossil. In terms of their skeleton, they do have a long neck as well. And going right to the end of what looks like it could have been wings, they have what looks like it was a claw or a hand of some sort.
So it kind of looks like a large fruit bat. But here's the problem.
They don't live up in Russia, though. They're more characteristic of the tropical islands in the Western Pacific Ocean and Indian Ocean and in Southeastern Asia.
Floyd says until this family comes forward with the specimen, we can't be certain what it is.
The process of mummification could take a long period of time. It's possible that this is an extinct species of animal that formerly lived in Russia that is no longer there today.
So I know we're going out on a limb here, but for now, we're going to say this is an unidentified extinct animal. Of course, it would take proper scientific examination to know for sure, but with the Arctic warming 2 times faster than the global average, we may see more strange creatures thawing out from the permafrost soon, and we'll do our best to identify them. On a Friday evening in 2008, geology professor Heinrich Frank is homebound on the freeway past the town of Novo Hamburgo, Brazil. Something catches his eye at a construction site on the side of the road. Take a look.
The first tunnel I found was very, very small. And when I entered, I see immediately the claw marks on the walls.
Look closer. Dr. Frank focuses on this, grooves dug into the tunnel walls, then slashes in the surface. What could have made these marks? Dr. Frank's research dates the caves to be about 12,000 years old. And there's reason to think they aren't just natural formations.
Taking a close look at them from a scientific point of view, they don't appear to be natural caves based on the types of rocks that they're being cut in. Some of these rocks are much harder than the easy rocks that would be broke by water. They also have a really weird shape in that they're more horizontal than they are vertical, which tells me that something carved these tunnels out.
And when you consider all the megafauna, you have only 2 animals with the necessary claws to build tunnels, the armadillos and the sloths.
We're talking now about the Pleistocene era, which ended 11,700 years ago. It was the age of megafauna, gargantuan mammals like mastodons, and in this case, perhaps the famous giant sloth. Could Frank have discovered some sort of ancient burrow? Or could such an animal, believed to be extinct, still be living there today?
When you go inside these tunnels, sometimes you feel like the animal is on the next corner.
The fossil record shows that Megalonyx sloths were the size of present-day bull elephants, but throw in 3 massive claws on each forearm used for defense. They roamed the Western Hemisphere when humans first arrived.
One can only imagine how terrifying it must have been to try to hunt these giant ground sloths. In fact, there has been evidence found of these giant ground sloths, the mylodonts, that were actually trapped in a cave in Argentina and corralled and kept as a food source by primitive humans.
Giant sloths and humans together? If it sounds like something out of a horror film instead of history, a recent find will change your mind. At White Sands in New Mexico, archaeologists uncovered the prints of a giant sloth being followed by humans. They were stalking it. So could these giants still be around? Did they dig the Brazilian tunnels? And if not them, then what did?
If you take a look at one of the tops of the ceilings of one of these caverns, you'll see that there looks like claw marks.
So geologist Bob Anderson thinks some sort of burrowing creature made these caves. And what if these animals still exist? Archaeologist Ed Barnhart says not so fast.
Well, some people have suggested that these giant caves are actually the holes and burrows. Well, that's an interesting idea, but show me the artifacts.
So far, there's no proof. No one has captured a giant sloth, found a carcass, or taken a single picture of one.
So I can take giant sloth right off the list.
And Barnhart even questions if giant sloths ever dug these tunnels at all.
Look down in this section here. Look, there's one, there's one coming across here. There is no reason to believe that these are claw marks because they would be repeatedly sections of 3.
Barnhart makes a good point, but if a giant 3-toed sloth had uneven claws, it might leave 1, 2, or 3 marks depending on how hard it was digging. Still, Barnhart thinks it's more likely the marks were created by an extinct worm-like creature called a trilobite. Some were predators. The biggest weighed as much as 10 pounds, and they were known to burrow into walls.
These are much more like worm casts that were into the wall. Trilobites make more sense to me because those are individual hot dog-shaped things that attach themselves to the wall and dig in.
But hang on. As you can see, there are distinct differences between these confirmed trilobite tracks and what we see in Dr. Frank's tunnels. Is this case really closed? Okay, it's true that no giant sloth fossils have been found in Dr. Frank's tunnels, but the marks don't look exactly like trilobite tracks either. So we can't come down on one side or the other. We're calling this an unexplained phenomenon until we get further proof. Tartu, Estonia, October 2021. Johan Uibapu receives a disturbing phone call from his mother regarding her chicken coop. He offers to take a look, but nothing could prepare him for what he finds.
Oh boy. Their tail is really tangled.
That's an understatement. Let's take another look. What looks like a heap of black rats is actually a heap of black rats with their tails hopelessly entangled together. There are 13 rats in this bundle bound together for life.
One of them, unfortunately, looks like it has passed on to the next world. And maybe that's for the best. I wouldn't want to be tied to a bunch of my brothers and sisters either.
Would you believe that this isn't the first time a knot of rats like this has been discovered? It's even got a name, the Rat King.
The term Rat King is thought to originate from German. It's a number of rats whose tails have become entangled so that they are basically like a rodent superorganism. An older, wiser rat would sit atop a pile of younger rats, and they would serve all of his needs. Unfortunately for rat kings, they are considered to be bad omens. It's thought that they warn of the plague. They're also associated with witchcraft.
Because of this, in old Strasbourg, where rat kings were found, they were usually drowned in a well or dunked in boiling water before being brought to the local school teacher to study them. Because of their supernatural associations and the rarity of their occurrences, there's debate as to whether or not rat kings are cruel, man-made hoaxes.
There is a long history of fabricating creatures for profit. Think about P.T. Barnum's Fiji Mermaid, George Hull's Cardiff Giant. Back in the day, people would take lizards and glue bat wings on them and say, here, buy a dragon. Or they'd stick a narwhal horn on a horse and say, this is a unicorn. So a hoax is definitely not outside the realm of possibility.
Knots are complicated. There's a whole area of mathematics called knot theory, dedicated to studying these things in the abstract. And the knots of the Rat King tales are complex too. Scientists have attempted to recreate them, and they quickly discovered it was a lot harder than expected. The knots they made looked too neat and intentional, and those rats were dead. Let's turn to our experts to see what they think about this whole thing. First, we turn to biologist Floyd Hayes to find out, is this real? And if so, how the heck does something like this happen?
One possibility is that it was faked and somebody actually stuck the tails together. But it could also be a natural phenomenon, and I think that's most likely in this case. It's been suggested that perhaps they are stuck together from birth, but that seems very unlikely because these are fairly well grown and they would likely starve to death if they were stuck together for a few weeks.
So if they weren't destined at birth to become parts of a rat king, how do they form?
So a rat king occurs when the tails are stuck together. This usually happens in black rats, which have unusually long tails compared to other species of rats. And it happens mostly in cold countries during the winter months. And it is believed that their tails are frozen together overnight when they're huddling together for warmth by water or urine or sperm or food.
However, in a bizarre twist, when we do some research of our own, we find that temperatures in this area of Estonia only had a low of 36 degrees Fahrenheit the night before this rat king was found. Not cold enough to freeze. And what's more, rats, contrary to their reputation, groom themselves nearly as much as cats. The idea that they could get stuck together with dirt and grime seems unlikely. So we turn to wildlife biologist Stephanie Schuttler. She says the Rat King legend carries a grain of truth.
Rats can be carriers of diseases and parasites. So the fact that people thought rat kings were bad omens or carriers or signals of plague, it's not that unreasonable of a leap.
It might just be coincidence, but the COVID-19 epidemic was still ravaging Europe when this video was shot. And Schuttler says there's another question gnawing at her. Why do these rats lie down and accept their fates? Why don't they fight back?
When animals are stuck or trying to escape from something, they can do things like chew their own appendage off. Like this has happened in leg traps with animals like coyotes or wolves. Why aren't these rats chewing their own tails off to get away?
Our verdict? It seems like rat kings form naturally. But what we don't know is the why of it all. Why aren't there more rat kings? And why don't these rats make more of an effort to escape? It remains an unexplained mystery. Eisenhower State Park, Texas, 2015. One morning after some record-setting rain, a few rangers are checking the park's back roads when they discover this.
It's pretty gross and weird and disgusting.
At first glance, it almost looks like patties of ground beef, oddly arranged straight down the middle of the road. But look closer. Is that one wiggling?
They look to be giant masses of earthworms or annelids, segmented worms. I've honestly never heard of any type of behavior like this before.
So what are these worms doing and why? Since we couldn't ask them, Gerhard got to theorizing.
One interesting possibility is that we're looking at a spontaneous attempt at evolution. These worms are attempting to build a superorganism.
And these worms wouldn't be the first to try it.
One example would be something called a tunicate. This is a very primitive type of vertebrate that will actually join together and form a massive chain, tens of feet long, and There is an advantage to this in terms of locomotion through the water.
Social insects can do something similar, creating a group of synergetic organisms known as a superorganism.
In times of heavy flooding, you'll often see these complete islands of ants that join together. It's kind of a survival mode where these animals are able to collaborate in order to survive an extreme situation.
And who could forget bees, one of the better-known superorganisms, and the source of inspiration for the term hive mind. Perhaps these worms are exhibiting just that.
I think this is a great example of a very primitive life form, a worm, demonstrating that perhaps it has a level of conscious collective intelligence that is greatly underestimated.
Some scientists are starting to believe that the complex brains that you and I have could have evolved from the very first worms. So does that make worms smart or humans dumb? We'll let you make the call. As for these worm balls, we'll rely on the brains of our experts.
Wow.
First, Dr. Floyd Hayes considers the superorganism theory.
Worms can detect each other through olfactory cues, and they are attracted to larger groups of worms, so they like to socialize for some reason.
While worms do socialize to some degree, Hayes notes that true superorganisms are eusocial. They have designated individuals that reproduce and others that don't.
They have a very complex society. These worms are not examples of eusocial animals, so I would not classify them as a superorganism.
Okay, if superorganism isn't the right word, what is?
It's hard to understand why exactly they're gathered together in the road there. It may be drying up a little bit, and one potential benefit of grouping together would be that they could stay more humid for a longer period of time.
Dr. Hayes brings up an important point. Worms need moisture to live. The mucus on a worm's skin actually acts as a medium for oxygen absorption, meaning that in order to breathe, the worm cannot dry out. That's what makes the strange alignment of these worm balls the biggest mystery of all.
It's really strange that the worms seem to congregate in the center of the road almost perfectly. It is probably the driest part of the road. Roads are designed to mound in the center so that water can go off the road.
It's not adding up. If worms need moisture to live, why gather at the driest place available? So folks, we're stumped. While it's not unnatural for animals to herd together, this peculiar behavior is leading us to call this an unexplained phenomenon. In the end, Darwin concluded that despite their small size, worms are just as capable of shaping the landscape as any person.